Hey guys, I'm Kevin Davis from kevinstrek.com. Today, I'm pretty excited about the interview that we're doing here today. This is with my buddy Rick Kaselj, who specializes in exercise for injuries. And he does a lot of cool programs for people who are recovering from injuries and for helping to prevent with injuries. Just in case somehow you haven't heard of Rick yet, I'll tell you a little background on him. He's done a lot of work in this topic, especially as a personal trainer, working in recreation centers, commercial gyms, physical therapy clinics, just about anywhere you can think of. And I'm going to kind of date you here, Rick, since 1994, almost 20 years now, which means that Rick knows his stuff, man. He's been around. He's also, like me, he's got the bachelor's degree in kinesiology, so he's a well-educated guy. But beyond that, he's also done a master's of science, and he focused in muscular imbalances during his work there and did a project for his master's, which was rotator cuff exercises. The exciting thing about that is that's what we're talking about today, is shoulder pain. Also, Rick's written some books. He's got 4 books out there, 3 injury manuals that are very comprehensive, a couple of DVD sets, and a little tip for you guys. If you go over to exerciseforoinjuries.com, Rick has a great email newsletter that he puts out basically every day, some information that is fantastic. I got to be honest with you guys, I get a lot of emails every day, and Rick is one of the guys that I look forward to and actually open and read the emails every day. So check him out. So welcome, Rick. Is there anything there that I missed or that you want to make sure people know about you?
I mean, I think you covered it, but, my area of expertise is I kind of help people overcome injuries with exercise. So like you're saying, I'm a kinesiologist, personal trainer. So what ends up happening is people end up coming to see me and they have some sort of injury or lingering pain. And then I help them, I give them exercises to help them overcome that pain and injury. So that's pretty much, and I've been doing, like you said, almost 20 years. So since 1994.
Yeah. So like I said, today we're going to talk about shoulder pain and shoulder injuries. And so why don't we start off? I mean, what are some of the common complaints and issues that you find with shoulder pain with clients of yours or with people on exercise for injuries?
Yeah, I think the most common injuries, it tends to be 4 that I end up seeing most commonly. And of course, there's way more than 4, but these are the top 4. It'll end up being like shoulder tendinitis. It'll end up being some sort of rotator cuff tear. It'll end up being some sort of shoulder impingement. And then 4th will be some sort of laxity, shoulder subluxations that they end up having. So those tend to be the most common 4. And then of those 4, the most common ends up being some sort of rotator cuff issue they end up having.
I've been there and had some of that myself, actually, years ago. So we're talking about all these injuries. The shoulder, we know. I can tell you from my training experience with people that I've worked with, is a common complaint and a common injury area. Why is it so important that we protect the shoulder and keep it pain-free? What are the benefits we're going to get here out of strengthening it?
Yeah. It's not necessarily strengthening what you end up doing for the shoulder pain, but it ends up being important because our shoulders are kind of one of our important joints along with our back and knees. So it ends up taking away, if you end up having shoulder pain, it ends up taking away from what you enjoy to do. It could be for fun or with your family. It'll end up affecting your work. And a lot of times it'll end up progressing and affecting your sleep, which ends up affecting your whole life. Because if you have poor sleep, it'll affect your recovery. It'll affect how you feel and how you're enjoying life. So really, ignoring shoulder pain, takes away enjoyment from your life. And we all want enjoyment and happiness. So it needs to be addressed, but you don't need to spend hundreds of hours fixing it or thousands of dollars fixing it.
Right. So what are some ways that we can fix this? I mean, you're saying that we don't need to spend hours and hours or thousands and thousands of dollars. What can we do without that?
There's lots of things you can do, and how I end up looking at it is you want to, a lot of times with the pain, when it comes to shoulder pain, if the injury could either occur, acutely, like so there's some sort of trauma or fall or hit that you end up getting injured. But a lot of times it ends up kind of gradually happening. It starts like a little twinge and it goes away, then it becomes an irritation, then it becomes a pain and it starts affecting you. So a lot of times it falls into that second category. And what ends up happening with that second category is we've ended up reshaping our shoulder the wrong way. So how we've ended up living our lives, the exercises we've done, the lack of exercises we've done, stress have all affected our shoulder and moved our shoulder in the wrong direction and reshaped it into in a way that it's prone to shoulder pain. So what we need to do is reshape that shoulder so it ends up moving out of shoulder pain. And there's a number of things that we can do that are involved in the gym, but then are also outside of the gym.
So it's kind of, it sounds like we're coming back down to some of what we talked about in the study that you did in school. I mean, you're talking about muscular imbalances there. People allow this, what should be a smaller possible injury or setback, to go over time and over time and over time and build up into an imbalanced shoulder girdle or body in general.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And like when I graduated in 97, but prior to graduating, I did lots of work with people with injuries. And, the primary focus I ended up doing was the strengthening and stretching. And that helped, but it wouldn't solve the problem completely. So I ended up going back to school and doing more schooling in order to kind of understand corrective exercise and muscle imbalances. And I brought those tools to my practice and to my clients, and that ended up helping. But still, it wasn't, things wouldn't fully last or things wouldn't fully heal. And then I started realizing, and I found some obscure books that started talking about this reshaping joints and reshaping the shoulder. Because, a key thing that we don't think about is we can end up reshaping our bones. We end up thinking that the bones are rigid and solid and they stay that way forever, and they don't. If we they are malleable, they can be reshaped. So if we change the forces on the bone will end up changing. And it ends up changing in a negative way for most of us because of our posture is a very simple example. What we do for work, so much computer work, moving from desktops to smartphones, which brings us more in this rounded forward position. And that constant stress on our bones ends up changing how our shoulder joint is, and oftentimes it leads to less space within the joint and more likely for it to get injured. Because if you look at those the top four shoulder injuries, number one ends up being shoulder tendonitis. Oftentimes, it's an issue with the rotator cuff. Rotator cuff tear, that's an issue with the rotator cuff. And then the third one, shoulder impingement, is a decrease in the space in that shoulder joint. And a lot of times, what's ending up getting pinched is the rotator cuff. Right. So we need to look at what we can do in our lives and in the gym when it comes to reshaping that shoulder in order to kind of fully overcome our shoulder pain.
Sounds about right. That's something though that I think like you said. People really don't think about the bones being so malleable and actually changing. Even when you talk about shoulder pain or injuries, everybody talks about the tendonitis and the rotator cuff issues, but not at all regarding the bone. So.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of times the focus ends up being, you have an injury, you have pain, okay, let's strengthen and stretch it. And that might be a temporary solution, but it's not a long-term solution.
Right. So what, are there any recommendations that you've got for avoiding, getting to that point?
How
warm-ups or cool-downs or different, things we should... I'm sorry, what was that?
What was the question, Kevin?
Yeah, sorry. Is there anything that you would recommend, like say, for example, a warm up or cool down type of routine, or something we could do daily or periodically to help to maintain pain-free shoulders?
Hmm. There's lots that you can end up doing, and the number one thing that I really like doing, and I got lots of benefit from, is called vertical hanging. So pretty much, it's like hanging from something, hanging from like a tree, or hanging from monkey bars, and it seems really weird and awkward to do that, but it ends up having a drastic effect on the shoulder. So before you do this, what I would suggest people to do is go to the gym, or if they have pull-up bars at home, or if they have a tree in the backyard, or something they can hang from when it comes to the playground near them. Go and try and lift your arms overhead, so straight ahead, and look at your arms and see what the range of motion is. Like, see how far you can bring your arm overhead. I mean, ideally, we should be able to bring our arms in line with our ears, and maybe even a little bit behind. But for a lot of people, they're not able to do that, even ones that don't have shoulder pain, because we talked about the reshaping of the shoulder, and then in time, that reshaping ends up being negative and leads to shoulder pain. With someone that ends up having shoulder pain, they even have less range of motion or movement in that shoulder. So test that out. And then I recommend grabbing something and hanging from it. And you end up hanging for about 15 seconds. It's going to be odd. It's going to feel weird. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. But give it a go for 15 seconds. And then take a break, 10, 15 seconds. And then another repetition of it. And do 3 repetitions. And then test it again. Bring your arms overhead and see how it is, and see if your movement has gotten better, or after a minute or two, do your shoulders feel looser and better? If your range is improved, if your shoulders feel looser and better, then it's something you should be doing.
Yeah. All right, that makes sense. That's a good little simple test you can do, yeah.
It's a simple test. It's something that will benefit you. It's something that anyone can do, and you can pretty much do it anywhere. You need something to grab onto and hang from. But I like it. Like this morning, I was working out, and we were doing I was doing a whole bunch of squatting patterns. Mm-hmm. So overhead squat, back squat, and front squat. And when I did my first set, I could see my range of motion wasn't great in my shoulder, so I just went over, grabbed on the bar. Hung a little bit for, tested my range before, hung for 15 seconds, did 3 repetitions, had better range of motion, shoulders felt looser, and then the exercises went better.
That's great. I mean, that's some awesome value right there. I mean, I think that's probably something that I'll use today.
Yeah. It's something very simple to do. Very effective.
For sure. I mean, you mentioned like the overhead squats. I mean, I can't tell you how many people that I've worked with. You come in and that's one of the first things I have to do is try to build the flexibility in their shoulders to even do those.
And that vertical hanging, if you look, it's pretty amazing. Like if you look at CT scans, so like pictures of the bones and the muscles when in that vertical hanging position, you can see that doing that over a period of time will end up reshaping the joint from the inside. It's pretty fascinating, right. and it's pretty cool. And just doing the little test I showed you and doing that, you'll see the benefit from it.
And so then you would say, just to continue with the with the 3 or 4 repetitions of that same thing. If you see the need, when you see that you do need to continue on with that, so that would be something you could do, with your workouts, continuing on.
Yeah, you could end up doing it for your workouts. When would you do it? You can do it. As you saw, I did it before my workout. Feeling a little stiff, I end up doing it, loosen up my shoulders. So you can end up doing it before your workout because we're working on reshaping the shoulder from the inside and creating more room in that shoulder joint. So it's something that you can do before your workout. You can end up doing after your workout, but it's always that balancing point, right? You tell someone this and then they end up doing like 100 times and then their shoulder hurts. Well, you kind of pass that threshold of like tolerance. So that's kind of why I say try it 3 times, and you can check to see for yourself if If you can handle more repetitions, you can do a few more repetitions, like 5. For me, I find like 3 ends up being good. If I end up doing more, the gains I get are minimal. So I just tell people 3, and if you want to add a couple more repetitions, you can, but see how your shoulder is. If you get more range, great. If it feels looser, great. But don't do 100 of them. No. That's excessive. Then it's going to hurt.
100 is kind of excessive with just about
That's
anything a lot of times. So.
Excessive.
So one of the other times that I notice a lot of people come in and they're beginning a weightlifting program and they find it difficult to stretch their shoulders. I mean, that's you just kind of answered a great exercise that we can use for part of my question there. The other thing is, what about with people who they seem to be going along fine and then they get 6 months or a year or 2 years into their training program and they start to notice this nagging pain, and like you said, maybe it's something that is from a muscular imbalance or some restructuring that they've had from years before, and now it starts coming out as they're working out. I mean, what would you recommend that they do at that point to deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, if that ends up being the case, so we talked about this reshaping. The other concept that I really focus in on is centration and tilt. So if we look at centration ends up being ideal alignment of that shoulder joint. So how the upper arm lines up with that shoulder joint. We want it ideal. Now, posture ends up being a part of that, but then also kind of like you were talking about, having balanced muscles from above in all directions, and then helping with that good position of the joint or centration. And then the second thing ends up being the tilt of the scapula, the shoulder blade. So if that shoulder blade is tilted forward, so a lot of times with a poor muscle imbalances, that'll end up affecting that space within the shoulder. It'll reshape the shoulder negatively, and it'll end up leading to injury and pain. So what we need to do is, if they all of a sudden it kind of creeps up on them, I need to look at those two things. How is their centration of their shoulder, and then how is that shoulder blade? Is it tilted forward? And you kind of think about it. If I have poor posture, my shoulder blade's going to move from pretty much up and down to more forward. And if it moves forward, it's decreasing that space in that shoulder joint, and a lot of times biting into the rotator cuff, which ends up being an issue for the top 3 of the 4 injuries that you'll see in the shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm noticing kind of as we talk about this, that there's definitely some different ways of thinking about the shoulder that those of you that are watching this, pay attention to what Rick's saying here, man, because I've worked with people for a decade now, and I've got some education in my background as well. But these are definitely some things that are very different than anything I've ever thought of, or ways that I've thought about it. So I mean, definitely going to be some stuff that's very helpful.
Regular thinking would be, okay, shoulder pain, work on the rotator cuff. Well, that's fine. That's fine. You're going to strengthen the rotator cuff, but if you don't reshape the shoulder, there's going to be less space in that shoulder, and you're just going to keep getting irritation. So the rotator cuff's going to get stronger, but there's going to not be enough space in that shoulder, so it's not going to be able to, you're not going to fully overcome that.
You may even be exacerbating the problem then, right? It seems like, if you're strengthening it without correcting that space or that positioning, it's not even, it theoretically may not even help, and that's what we're all taught. I mean, I'm sure you can remember this, Rick, when you were in school, at least
1994. Yep.
Yeah, back in the early 90s. There, that's what we were taught, though. Is to you've got shoulder pain. What do? These light movements of twisting and rotating and different things to strengthen the rotator cuff, right? And there's no talk about the space that's left within the shoulder or the shoulder capsule there at all. So,
yep. I mean, it's been a long journey for myself as well. Like you said, 1994, you implement what you've learned, and you kind of see the results, with your clients and with yourself. You start challenging things, you start searching for new answers, and you start challenging your beliefs, and then you start changing those beliefs, and by bringing in new techniques, and learned, found, and tried out. And this is kind of where all this comes in.
Well, and then luckily for the rest of us, you start sharing those new beliefs with with everybody else. So we've got a lot to learn there. So
definitely, it ends up, it ends up helping everyone, because these, what will end up happening is these concepts are kind of new, and people resist them, and that's perfectly fine. Then they'll try them, and see benefit, and then they'll actually start following them, and it works out being good because it ends up helping everyone. I mean, who doesn't want to, like, being in the fitness industry, doesn't want to help people reach their goal? And then sometimes a fitness goal, sometimes what's going to hold them back or get in their way of reaching the fitness goal is pain. And if we can help them, around that pain, what's wrong with that? Because a good chunk of our clients will stop training with us because of pain.
For sure. I mean, like I was telling you, I've got. Well, I mean, I can think of at least a half a dozen people just in my, business, in my in-person training business in my gym. There, I can think of at least a half a dozen people that I'm gonna start to implement some of what we're talking about here right off the bat. So I mean, definitely some great sharing that we've got here.
Yeah.
So something else I was wondering about: is there a point where this has gone too far? I mean, for us to be able to help, us as trainers to be able to help, or to be able to use these methods or this way of thinking, is there a point where it's gone too far and you do need to go seek, help with a doctor or sports medicine? And when is that?
Okay, so what happens now, this is how it works with this internet world. You get a pain, so you go on the internet and you try to figure out what you got.
Yep.
Sometimes you can figure out what you got, okay, by reading forums and things and stuff and figuring out what you got. But what the next step, what ends up happening is you think you think you have this, and then you start kind of doubting. I might have, well, maybe I don't have this. I actually have this. In order to, if you get to that point where you have a clear idea of what you have, and things are still bothering you, that's when I say go get some help. Get someone to look at it over again, give you a second opinion, give you a clear idea of what's going on, and then you can go from there. Because just having that confirmation from someone else saying, it's this and it's not so bad, eases a lot of stress from yourself, gives you a lot of clarity, and then it allows you to focus on what you need to do. Now, the part that a lot of people forget is, we end up being the best person that can end up fixing ourselves. Yes, we can go to people that will provide clarification, confirmation, and direction, but ideally, we are the person that is our greatest therapist, greatest doctor in fixing ourselves. Because even if what ends up happening, worst case scenario, you end up having surgery, well, it's up to you to prepare yourself for surgery, right? Because the better you prepare yourself for surgery, the faster your recovery, and there's exhaustive amounts of research that show that. And what we're seeing here in the Vancouver area is a lot of doctors are refusing or delaying knee joint replacement. And this has nothing to do with the shoulder, but it kind of it relates to this story, is they're delaying knee joint replacement surgery because the person needs to lose 50 or 100 pounds before they can give them a knee replacement. So if they give them a knee replacement right now, what's going to happen is they're going to wear out the knee replacement a lot faster, or the surgery is going to fail because they're progressively increasing, getting heavier and are less fit and are losing more muscle mass. So they might need a joint replacement, but the joint replacement's going to fail, or it's going to end up wearing out. So the same thing ends up happening with the shoulder. If you end up having worst case scenario and it ends up leading or needing surgery, you're going to need to work on it prior to, and you have to work on it afterwards. So that's kind of where that's where my angle comes from. If you have an idea of what it is, if you end up having that doubt and confirmation of what it is, go get someone to give you a second opinion, give you a clear idea of what you end up having and what you should focus in on. But remember that we are probably the ones that can fix ourselves the best.
And so that's a great point. I mean, with some, sorry, I mean, and so that's a great point. Even with, even if you do find that you need to go seek some help, it's still using some of what we're talking about here, using these methods of improving and repairing and kind of bringing that, we're talking about the shoulder here today, bringing that shoulder joint back to how it should be in the musculature, balanced back out, and same thing with the space in the joint. Can still be part of how you're going to repair it, even after you have seen the doctor or the therapist or whoever you need.
I mean, exactly. Like it. I don't know. There's not much more.
Not much more on that.
Not much more I can add. I can rant more, but that's I mean, the philosophy of someone will fix me.
Yeah.
Is not very effective compared to I'm going to fix myself. And fixing yourself ends up helping. Yeah, you might need some guidance, confirmation, pointing in the right direction, but ultimately, I mean, it's up to us.
And that's really, I mean, that's great, because that's kind of the my belief as well, and part of what I try to talk about on here is how to thrive, how to really be able to get the most out of your body and out of your life, and that's exactly what you're saying. If you can enjoy your life better by maintaining and taking care of your own shoulder, then that's perfectly aligned with my philosophy as well. So,
Yeah.
Are there any? I did have a question regarding, because I get this question all the time, glucosamine, or some of the various dietary changes and supplement changes that you can use for joint pain. Have you seen any advantage to that, or does it not really have much value?
I mean, I can't say that I'm like an expert when it comes to the nutrition side of things, but this is what I've ended up. This is kind of my thoughts on it, and this is how I end up relaying it to people. Now, if I don't end up, a lot of times, why we're taking the supplements is a lot of times we're trying to address some sort of inflammation. Mm-hmm. And if we don't, or if we're not trying to address that inflammation, we're trying to hopefully regenerate something, cartilage, whatnot. Well, right. There's not going to be any regeneration happening if there's inflammation. So we need to kind of address that inflammation. Now, how we can end up doing that dietary-wise would end up being, trying to, I mean, number one ends up being hydration. So if we can try to hydrate as much as we can and keep our bodies in balance when it comes to water intake, that ends up taking us a big step forward when it comes to inflammation and helping with our recovery. The second thing would be, trying to avoid foods that end up inflaming the body or leading to inflammation and inhibiting that recovery process. And things that would end up doing that, I mean, a lot of times it ends up being excess processed foods. Yep. It could and seeing if you are sensitive to any specific foods. And that could end up being like gluten. That can end up being like soy. That can end up being like dairy. And you'll need to experiment on yourself to see how things are. Like, how do you feel if for one day or 2 or 3 days you remove gluten from your diet, or if you really like soy, if you remove it from your diet for 2 or 3 days, how do you end up feeling? Or what if you remove dairy from your diet for 2 or 3 days and seeing how you end up feeling? If I end up taking care of those two things, then I can add the third thing, which ends up being some sort of supplementation, which has some evidence or doesn't have some evidence to help out. So that's the approach that I end up taking, because if a lot of people will go for the pill and look for the fix for the pill, but if I'm taking in inflammatory foods or I'm not hydrated, the pill doesn't matter. If I am doing things that end up inflaming the joint, the pill doesn't matter. So I need to look at those other things and make sure those other things are in line. Then I can try supplementation. So that ends up being, my thought on the whole process. I think it helps and it plays a key. But if I don't have those other ducks in a row, the supplementation doesn't matter.
It's kind of like that mentality that we see a lot in our society anyway. The quick fix. You said it. Quick fix is what we're looking for. And that's not always the answer. There are things that, like what we've been talking about throughout this whole conversation, things that you can do that are going to actually fix or help with the problem rather than just masking the symptoms and some magic pill that fixes it today, kind of thing. I mean, it takes, months or maybe years, maybe your whole life to develop that imbalance. So now you need to take the time to correct it properly. So, even with some good programming, if we're doing what should be a safe and effective workout, there's a lot of different things, different factors as far as changes in stress levels in other part of our lives. Like you mentioned right there, inflammation, dietary changes, things like that can end up causing us to have imbalances and shoulder pain. So do you have any tips for assessing these imbalances and weaknesses, aside from the one test that we've already talked about, in order to avoid, knowing when we're overworking the shoulder? Because that sometimes comes in, if we're doing a lot of super heavy, bench pressing and shoulder pressing and doing 5 different kinds of each of those exercises on the same day and that sort of thing. So would there be any tips that you've got for avoiding or, I guess maybe, assessing if we are overworking the shoulder?
Okay. I mean, there would end up being 2 ways that I would end up kind of approaching that. I call it cooking the rotator cuff. It's not a good thing, because the rotator cuff provides protection of the shoulder joint. And if you cook it, meaning you fatigue it or overwork it, well, it can't do its job. So you end up having more stress on the joint, which is a negative thing that we don't want. So you don't want to cook the rotator cuff, meaning, doing the rotator cuff exercise you find on the internet, high repetitions prior to your workout, probably not a good idea. The second thing I would end up doing is if someone kind of palpates, so if I find the outer part of my shoulder and to the middle a little bit, so you got the middle or to the front just a little bit, and if I kind of palpate through there, that'll give you what that ends up doing is, if it's very, very, it'll give you an idea if you have sensitivity in the rotator cuff. So, supraspinatus, which ends up being one of the rotator cuff muscles, the most common that ends up being injured, you can end up palpating it there. And if you end up having sensitivity, that ends up giving you an idea that it's been overworked or you've worked it too much. So that would end up being now, it's not a perfect test, but it'll give you an idea of if I end up palpating it a lot or palpating it and it feels very sensitive, it's kind of a good cue that I've done a little too much for my shoulders. And then the third thing would end up being is if I end up taking a ball, you can find out whatever density you want. So you go from like a racquetball all the way to like a golf ball. Mm-hmm. And if I end up self-massaging those muscles around the shoulder blade, if I end up having high sensitivity, it's probably a good chance that you end up really working your shoulder muscle.
Okay, great. Yeah, that'd be definitely I think of a few people that would certainly help out. I had one more thing that I definitely wanted to get to with you here. I've been working with someone who's got some joint weaknesses, and he's actually had some osteoarthritis, and so there's been kind of definitely some loss of space in the joints, and that's actually in several different joints, not the shoulder only. But we've found lately here that his shoulders are becoming a hindrance to some of the other exercises that it works with. And so, he was definitely, I was talking to him about how I was going to talk to you about some shoulder pain, and he's like, man, ask him if there's anything that I can do that'll help get back some of the strength, get back that movement, because it's more, not being able to lift through the full range of motion overhead and that sort of thing, but then it comes into play even on exercises like the bench press, and really any pressing movement, not only the vertical pressing. So, do you have any tips for people who are having issues like that, where they're starting to see the shoulder cause weakening in other movements? Where to start, really, I guess, is kind of what he was asking.
A lot of times what I find is if there ends up being pain within the shoulder, the first muscle group that ends up not working properly ends up being the scapular muscles. So I will oftentimes end up targeting them.
Okay.
And the most basic way of ending up doing that is, I mean, if I end up having like resistance bands, straight arm out in front of me, and I separate the arms and I try to focus on the muscles in my shoulder blades doing that work, holding that resistance apart. And then if I separate the arms as far as I can, trying to focus on those scapular muscles doing the work so I can help fire them or wake them up. And then I would end up, just doing that touch below shoulder height, and then I can go angles. And that's what I would end up starting off with, just kind of targeting those scapular muscles. And then I would end up, arms straight, building that tension in that scapular area, and then getting them to lift the tubing and the hands overhead and really working those scapular muscles. Now, when I work on those scapular muscles, I will end up doing them near the end of my workout as opposed to at the beginning of my workout. Once again, that rotator cuff cooking. If I also cook the scapular stabilizers, those shoulder blade muscles, then they can't do their job of like protecting that shoulder. Other things that would end up helping is, prior to doing like shoulder exercises or your shoulder workout, if you end up doing stuff that'll wake up or prime up those scapular muscles, and a lot of times if you're doing pressing movements, doing like low-level push-ups will end up helping. You're just priming those scapular muscles. You just end up waking up those scapular muscles, and they're very active with push-up movements. So it could be full push-up movements from the toes, from the knees, or from the walls, from the wall, the hands on the wall, just to prime up those scapular muscles, wake them up, but not overworking them, and then get into what your workout is for that day.
For the day, yeah.
Yeah.
Great, excellent. Is there anything that you think that we didn't cover here, or things that are going to be great value? I think we've gotten, from my standpoint, I've seen a ton of value in what we've talked about already. But is there anything else that you think?
Yeah, I think we've really covered a very broad. We kind of have covered a lot of it. I mean, we're looking at trying to think that, what we've done is kind of reshape the shoulder negatively. We need to reshape it positively. One of those ways of reshaping the shoulder from the inside is that vertical hanging exercise, and I kind of showed you how you can see if it works. And I suggest that you end up, trying that one. The couple tests on seeing if you've overdone it on your shoulder, I think would be very helpful for people. And then talking about those scapular muscles, that ends up being a key thing. Targeting them with specific exercises, but I also find that priming of them ends up helping as well. Just kind of waking them up ends up helping out. And really the understanding that, we might get help. We might get confirmation of what's going on, or be provided what's exactly going on. We might get pointed in the right direction, but ultimately it's up to us to fix ourselves. So I think that ends up being a big point.
That's a huge point right there. So, with all that we've learned here today, hopefully that's going to be a great help to people. If they find that they want to get some more information and more resources from you, I know I've mentioned already, exerciseforoinjuries.com is where they can find you. How about, continuing on with specifically the shoulder pain, where should they look for you with that?
So exactly. If people just want to go over to exercisesforoinjuries.com, there's tons of articles and videos and audios when it comes to a variety of injuries, and also including shoulder injuries. So it's a resource. You can take a look at it. And then when it comes to like specific, people want more information about what I've ended up talking about. There ends up being, Fix My Shoulder Pain, which is something that I've ended up putting out that kind of puts together all the stuff that I've ended up talking about. So people can refer to that resource. And I think you'll have a link to it underneath this video so people can check it out. And then if people want more information when it comes to those scapular exercises side of things, if you head over to Exercises for Injuries, I have something called Scapular Exercise Program, and that is kind of a program that targets those scapular exercises. So, that's where people can get more information about myself and more resources when it comes to shoulder injuries and shoulder pain.
Great. And like Rick mentioned there, guys, if you look down below here, I'm going to put links for exercises for injuries. I'm going to put links for the specific things that we've talked about here today. That way you guys can hook up with Rick. As I told you before, he's a great resource, and he's got the email newsletter that you can sign up for free. That is a fantastic resource that I use all the time. So, other than that, Rick, thanks for hanging out with us today, man. It's been great, and I think it's going to help out a lot of people with some of the information that you've given. So thanks for hanging out. Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
If people have any questions, they can leave them down below, and I'll definitely come by and answer them. So, thank you very much for your time, and thank you, everyone, for kind of watching and listening.
All right, thanks.